Hey folks, welcome back to the Hybrid Athlete channel. I am Dr. Paul Rimmer, and today we are going to talk about recovery. In a previous video I've talked about short-term recovery, basically what we need to do to make sure that we're giving our bodies the best opportunity to recover from the stimulus of training to get us ready for the next session. Today's video, which I've linked here, today's video we're going to talk about recovery in the more long-term sense. So when would you need to do more long-term recovery? I think there's two components to this. So the first component is the physical component. So this will be more relevant for people who have trained for a specific event. Maybe it's been a period of several months training up to the big day, and on the big day of the event we've really pushed ourselves, we come off it, we feel battered, we feel broken. As an ultramarathon runner, that can cause some serious disruptions to us for several weeks after an event, depending on the duration of the event. Even for people who aren't in ultra endurance sports, long blocks of training can be very fatiguing, very tiring, and then if we're peaking for a competition, we give it an all-out effort, we might find that we just need a bit of a break physically because, like I say, we've peaked appropriately and we've caused that extra stress of competition. The other side of it as well is that obviously if we're accumulating a lot of volume, the chances are that whatever sport you do, whatever event you're taking part in, there will be certain little things where you will pick up the chances are you will pick up little injuries, little niggles here and there, little strains, even just things like, the feet being a bit beaten up if you're spending a lot of time on your feet running and it might not be used to. Physical recovery is an element where we might not really need that much physical recovery if we're just training year round and we're taking little deloads in our training, or we're not hammering ourselves in competition, we might not need to have a physical recovery, but the chances are that we will need some kind of psychological recovery. I know from experience with myself personally and working with athletes, the biggest drain on people's energy isn't so much the physical output, it's the physical output plus the stress of competition, the stress of turning up day after day after day to hit sessions, the stress of competition itself, and all of that training and all of that energy and effort and doing things the right way for several weeks or months at a time. Once that competition is over, that emotional release is there, and actually people do need a bit of time mentally to decompress afterwards. So I think these two components are obviously very interlinked and intertwined. Like if our mindset's in a good place, then our training's likely to be in a good place. But if our mindset's in a bad place, our training's likely to suffer. But also physically, if we're in a bad place, our mindset's going to suffer because we can't train the way we want to train. So I think it's important that if you're training hard for, say, 2/3 to 3/4 of the year, and depending on how you split up your competition calendar, or even if you're competing 3 times a year but it's fairly well spaced apart, it's really important to have these periods of recovery. So I'm going to talk about what recovery is. From the physical perspective, we need to go through a sort of hierarchy of importance. The first thing we need to focus on is our health, physically and mentally. It's quite often natural to get this kind of post-event crash, particularly if it's something you've worked really hard towards. So we need to put strategies in place so that we've got something to keep our mind busy. Fortunately for me, I've got my business to keep me busy, but certain things like making sure I've got holidays planned, times with friends and family, is going to be massively helpful in just improving mood state, and the influence that will have, even in terms of your hormones, your endocrine system, your brain function, is going to be massive. But on that note, I think it's important to remember that it's your event and it's you doing it. Like, other people might not care as much as you do, so it can be quite a bit of a letdown actually when other people aren't necessarily as enthusiastic as you are, or maybe that's just because I haven't got very supportive friends. I'm joking, of course, my friends are awesome. So psychologically, it's good to get away from training for a while in terms of just that same monotonous day after day after day. Now, if you love training, then don't worry about it. I'm not here to say that you should stop training altogether, but psychologically, being able to change our training up a little bit, do things maybe that we enjoy, focus more on activity and things that are still healthful but low impact, allowing the body to recover effectively, are going to be massive, both physically and mentally. So on the mental aspect of things, do things that you enjoy. This doesn't mean that, if we're following a really detailed, attention to detailed performance nutrition program, we don't just stop eating well and then all of a sudden go and start eating 12 Greg's donuts every single day. What it means is that we might just relax our eating structure a little bit, strip back the principles to the really fundamentals that we know we need to for good nutrition, rather than obsessively eating at the right times all of the time. Giving ourselves a bit of a break from the diet stress as well, which is going to help psychologically, And we can do the same with training. We can follow some basic principles of training that allow us to recover, that also don't cause us to decondition. So what might those principles be? Well, principle number one is don't do things that cause you pain unless that pain is something that you need to go through to rehabilitate something. And again, that's like a physiotherapy kind of paradox. It's like if someone's got an injury and you need to rehabilitate it, the chances are they're going to have to load a tissue or a muscle in a way that's going to cause pain, but we don't want to cause it too much pain that then the condition becomes worse. And again, this is very condition specific. This is also a reason why I don't really offer injury specific advice on the internet, because go and speak to a physiotherapist who can do a proper assessment and figure out what the nuts and bolts of the injury is. So principle one is don't do things that cause you pain, brackets caveated with, unless you have to rehabilitate it. Number two is recovery means recovery. It doesn't mean that we're in a new training block. So principle number two is do things that stimulate enough to maintain your performance, but without annihilating yourself. Structure a training program like I've done here. So if you look what I've done here, this is for my strength blocks. I'm going into a strength phase now. I've kind of just done a series of different exercise types: push, pull, legs, some plyometric work, some mobility work, and a little bit of cardio at the end. And I've just listed a load of exercises, I've just listed 1 to 6 down the side. And then for each session, I will just roll a dice, here, and I will roll the dice, the number of each exercise. Then I will then use that exercise. What I do across the course of a week, I'll only lift 2 or 3 times a week, reducing my training frequency down before I go into my next proper strength block. What I'll do though is, because obviously the same exercises can come up on multiple days, if I've already done that exercise, I'll play exercise bingo and just cross it off and then roll again and do another exercise. That's really good because not having that structure and the worry about, oh God, I've got to do a heavy leg session today, or all of that kind of stuff, it's just really beneficial to me. It's just let the dice take care of it. But the cool thing is you're still selecting exercises that are likely going to be beneficial to you, but you're always praying for bicep curls over something which is a bit more glamour muscles than things that are a bit harder. And you can do the same with endurance training. So think of the sessions that you want to do. But one of the things that I would always encourage if you're doing any kind of training on a recovery block, let me change that. I would always encourage people to do some kind of training or exercise or activity on a recovery block just to stay physical, to keep joints moving through a full range of motion, obviously if it's not causing pain, and to make sure that we are in a good place. Is that point number 2? Point number 3. We'll go with that point number 2. Point number 3 is stay away from failure. So even if you're doing strength work, if you're doing endurance work, we want to keep everything nice and easy. Not too easy as to just decondition, but we want to get to a point at which we're staying within proximity to near where we were starting to struggle, but without actually getting to that point. So we want an effort level of kind of a 7 or an 8 out of 10 for those sessions. We're not progressing load week on week on week. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to get in there, get a feel for training, and then go from there with a semi-structured approach. Point number 4 is if you don't feel like training and you're normally a hard trainer, don't force yourself to train. Your body's trying to tell you something. Go and do some form of other activity that just keeps you moving. Take up yoga, go rock climbing, go and find some other activities that you enjoy doing that just add a bit of variety, a bit of a new stimulus to the body. And, go and find something different to do if you find that your love for training is not there, and then don't beat yourself up about it. I think psychologically, one of the hardest things is letting go of training. But if you love your training so much, then you're finding your love for training is diminished a little bit after a big event or after a long period of training. Give yourself a break from it, but just be very clear on the duration of that break. Which brings me on to point number 5. How long should you take in terms of this recovery phase? And the answer is this is a how long a piece of string type question. And this really comes down to athlete monitoring. So what is it that you do to monitor yourself? You look at your mood state, you're looking at your performance. So every few weeks we might do a little testing session on whatever it is. Maybe if we're a runner, we blast out a little 5K. If we're a lifter, maybe we just go and do some we just put a load on the bar and what we normally feel comfortable with, and it sort of feels a bit heavier. Especially if we've been training fairly consistently with some of those movements and keeping some training in there, you'll get a feel for it intuitively. One of the things is that I would always say if we're going through that checklist starting from the top is, 1, are my injuries healed up? No, are they healed up enough that I can start to go back to training but they're still going to recover? Is the second thing we want to look at. The third thing then really is more of the psychological stuff. Is my mood state ready? Am I still hating or resenting training? Am I psychologically recovered from the event? Am I raring to get back to training? That's not to say if you're not raring to get back to training that you shouldn't go back to training. It's just one of a number of boxes that we can tick. And then ultimately, like I've said, is there anything else that we can measure that is showing us that maybe we are underpowered? We're just doing similar sessions or easier sessions that we normally blast through, but all of a sudden, like, the performance just still isn't there. One of the things that I find is the most challenging for a lot of athletes is they come back after a few weeks off, they think they're recovered, they come into the gym and they underperform. And the question then becomes, are you underperforming because you've deconditioned? That might be the case if we've done no training. But if we've still been doing bits of training, bits of movement, the chances are that you won't get these big drop-offs in performance. Now, if the performance still isn't there, and other things like, sleep's disrupted, stress levels are still high, like I said, mood state, we're more irritable, all these sort of red flags, the chances are we might need to extend that recovery longer. And the way we speed up that recovery, which is paradoxical, is by trying to keep it in some positive thread. So like I said before, we don't want to just abandon training, abandon nutrition, abandon thinking about sport entirely. We just need to reframe how we think about those things, so we're dealing with a loose set of principles rather than this kind of like, detailed attention to detail, stressful, got to do this, got to do that type plan. Because what we need to have is an understanding that if we just let go of all of those things, like let's say we go out partying after an event, work with a lot of fighters, if they go on a blowout for a few days afterwards, they regain a lot of weight, that stress that's going to be put on the body when it's got to come off, builds a bad relationship with food, and disrupt sleep patterns. All of that stuff is going to delay the recovery period. So recovery is something that we should look at through a lens of like a low resolution lens. It should look like a performance program, but just without all of the nitty gritty, awful attention to detail on it. We still want to follow some basic principles if we want to recover as quickly as possible. Now, if you don't want to do that and you need a month of blowing out, not caring about training, and that's how you operate, that's fine. But obviously, we still need to be aware if that's something that we're fine with at the time because we want to do that, but it's not something we're fine with when we go back to training and we feel frustrated. Then we get into this kind of binge purge cycle between training and off season, which then becomes a kind of self-supporting vicious circle and where we don't want to be as an athlete. So I always try and practice myself and preach to my athletes the idea of being a year-round athlete. But as part of being a year-round athlete, recovery is important, but we have to use recovery in the right terms for the individual. And we have to use recovery not as an excuse to just not support recovery. Now, there's always going to be these conflicts, like how much is too much training, how much isn't, and that's where you've just got to understand yourself, but also be aware that we can't just go renegade in recovery because it's not likely to be helpful in the long run. So my advice would be follow those 5 principles, get yourself healthy. Priority number 1, should be obvious, but people don't do it. Number 2, put some training variety in there, do things that you enjoy. Number 3, stay away from failure, train, but don't train too hard. Number 4, if you don't feel like training, then don't stress about it. If you are a hard trainer, then just chill, don't worry too much, take the session off, just make sure you're ticking a number of minimal boxes. And point number 5 was, how do you know you're ready to return? Monitor yourself, look at your numbers, look at your data. And then when those numbers are sort of coming back to like you feeling like yourself, you're ready to train, you're raring to get back in, that's fine, that's one aspect of it. But if after a couple of weeks back in training, our performance isn't improving at the rate we want, or the sessions that we were doing much earlier were really hard, maybe we just need to just chill out for another couple of weeks, just let the body recover, rather than just trying to bludgeon through it and making things worse. Speak to you soon, where I'm going to do some updates on what I'm doing this year, what my competition goals are and stuff, and where I'm at currently with my recovery block, which is basically just following the principles I've said there. Please give this video a like and subscribe, it's been useful to you. Whatever it is you're doing, wherever it is you're doing it, have a great rest of your week, and I will speak to you soon. Right, take it easy guys, peace.